I'm really excited to interview Emily as part of our series, kicking off the LEAP schedule for the year. For those who don't know, Emily has written two books. The first is called Building Successful Communities of Practice. It's a guide around creating and sustaining communities of practice at varying stages of maturity. And I really like it because I used it a couple of years ago before I met Emily, myself and my team working at a government department. And it came in really, really handy. So if you're developing communities of practice, want to know more about them, try and understand their value proposition, why you should invest in them, it's certainly a book that I think you should grab hold of. The other book is called Team Onion. So this is an interesting book in that it explores collaboration. So it talks about the different layers of involvement between teams. So you've got core members, you've got extended contributors, you've got stakeholders. And it talks a lot about teamwork, improving communication, and trying to develop that dynamic work environment that delivers real impact. So again, another book, if you're in the transformation or agile delivery space, that would come in handy. And Emily also runs a consulting firm called Tacit, more about that in a moment. But all of this follows the last 15 years of working initially as a civil servant and now as a consultant in and around central government. Emily's work, I think, for those who are in the central government space is well known in terms of developing communities of practice at the center of government. She and I met through a mutual ex-client and also a friend who was listening to what I was saying about LEAP, myself and my co-founder, and thought, you've got to meet Emily, and I can understand why. So Emily, a warm welcome. Can I turn it over to you to do a brief introduction?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the introduction. So my name's Emily Webber. I've been, I think it's interesting, my history of communities of practice, because it goes back further than anything at work, and it's always about bringing people together to create a bigger impact. And it's something that I really kind of jumped into at work when I was working at Government Digital Service back in 2012, 2013, 2014. So I tend to work with organisations that are trying to help create the environment for people to be their best. So I spend a lot of time working with communities of practice, working with helping people collaborate with each other, helping leadership teams kind of communicate what they're trying to achieve, and also on things like career pathways and multidisciplinary and how they fit into multidisciplinary working. I've been independent for 10 years now, working across a lot of government departments and some other organisations as well. And I really love that. Being able to see lots of different organisations gives you a really kind of fantastic, rounded, pragmatic view of the world and how to kind of bring tools and techniques in.
Absolutely. I mean, it's arguable that it's never been more important to build that sense of community and enabling people to do their best, particularly with all the new tech coming in and people concerned about the implications. And it's quite clear, actually, that the most important thing we all need to be doing going forward is being more human and connecting more. And I think that's really, really interesting. And also, I touched on your consulting firm, Tacit, earlier, and it's a name that I'm drawn to, not least because it's one that most people don't know what it means. But when you unpack it, actually, you realize it's about knowledge. So knowledge that's deeply personal, knowledge that's context specific, knowledge that's garnered through experience and, learning by doing, and so on. And for us at LEAP, we're very much about peer-to-peer, social, community-driven learning. And we're scaling that with an infusion of social media, some gaming, analytics, AI, and so on. So there are lots of synergies between what we're trying to achieve and clearly what you've been doing for so long. So really exciting to be unpacking some of that on the call this afternoon.
Just on that, aside from a lot of people don't know what it means, but also can't spell it when I say it out loud. It's really kind of, I guess it's really inherent in in communities of practice and how you maintain knowledge that is implicit and is really hard to write down and lives in your culture and your people, the more, the further apart we are. So people are working in hybrid organizations or time sharing offices and that kind of stuff. It's really, they don't really necessarily have opportunities to pass that kind of information and that knowledge on because they don't spend any time together.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's unconscious in the way that happens. And at the other end of the spectrum, you do have organizations where lots of people use that tacit knowledge as a power mechanism. It's a way of controlling, power and job security. I think we should come on to that in a moment or two, because this idea of community and liberating that knowledge, I think, is critical. I think many people who will be tuning in and listening to this will have faced lots of challenges around building and sustaining communities. And the challenges often span from leadership support or lack thereof, time constraints, particularly matrix environments, or people struggling to make the case for why organizations should be investing in communities of practice. And I think we'll explore a lot of that during the call today, but also on the masterclass. I suppose it's worth starting with your view, because you've seen multiple patterns, different organizations, different challenges, and different solutions. So, I wonder if you could sort of unpack what a genuinely successful, thriving community looks like from your experience.
It depends, of course. It depends on where a community is in its life cycle as well. So fundamentally, a community of practice has the essence of community in it, and I think that's really important. It becomes around connecting people, and it becomes around that social aspect. Humans are social beings, and we do need to connect with other people. And when you don't have that connection with other people, it's really miserable. And I'm sure I've definitely been in jobs, I'm sure many of us have, where we feel unmotivated, unconnected, and there was that term going around a while back, the quiet quitting term. It's like you don't feel kind of engaged with other people, you don't have any work friends. It makes it really hard. So I think like fundamental to any community is those connections between people. And if you can help people connect across barriers that they are not that the organization isn't necessarily barriers that the organization has in place, maybe that's a team or a program or a location or whatever, if you can kind of cut across those with community, it means that people can find those connections with people that they are have common interests and passions with, and it really helps motivate them, make them feel happier, and from an organizational point of view, actually make them more productive. So it's hugely beneficial. So I would always say that so starting off with that, a thriving community will have people that look out for each other. It will have people that feel like they belong to something and some sense of common voice. So you might engage, instead of engaging with, I'm going to go and speak to Michael, it's like, I'm going to go and speak to the learning community, for example, and you're the representative of that at that point in time. So it looks like a group of people. And once you have those connections, then the other stuff comes, like the learning comes, because people start sharing with each other. It's like we've all, I'm sure, been to lunch with somebody at work to moan about stuff or to talk about common problems that we have, and start to find ways to fix those. So with the social aspect comes the learning and the knowledge sharing that comes with that as well. So people asking each other out for help. And as a community matures, people will start to collaborate on common solutions to common problems that they have, and start to copy each other and kind of seed good practice. So like the kind of adoption of good things will spread out from that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the way you talk about the different types of focus various communities have. Some are social, some are learning, and otherwise. And I suppose that probably links to my next question, which is, We see lots of communities start off with lots of enthusiasm. People are bought in, people are engaged, people want to go and have the meetings and do lots of work outside of it. Everyone puts their hand up to volunteer. But give it 3 to 6 months and it's just like tumbleweed. Nobody goes to the meetings, nobody wants to talk about it. You've got all these efforts to try and reinvigorate and revamp them. So I just wonder, in your experience, why do they succeed? Well, seem to succeed in terms of starting off, but very quickly the wheels come off.
It depends on a number of things, but I think what happens sometimes is that people get really excited and say, let's put all these people together and have this community, and it will happen and it's exciting, without spending time, again back to those connections, without spending time for those connections to form properly.
Yeah.
And the way that I've found the communities that are most successful, they start small, and they're quite deliberate about some of the choices that they make, and people join at the point that they want to join, and it grows kind of almost organically.
Yeah.
If you take 100 people and put them in a room together, they're not a community. That isn't a safe space. That's that might work for a bit, and it might work for certain things, but it's not going to form those connections that will keep the community going.
Really interesting. And you made a comment there about some communities that start organically. And we've seen, the other end of the spectrum, organizations just say, well, we're starting this stuff. It's very top down. And I mean, I wonder if you could add some color to the sorts of mistakes you've seen big organizations make around communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think size is there's a couple of things here that I always think people should look out for. Size is one of those things. Mandatory or voluntary is one of those things, and confusing it with more ways to do work is another one of those things. So when it comes to size, there is a bunch of really interesting research out there. If you look at things like Dunbar's number or the Dunbar graph, that very much talks about the size of social groups that we can maintain, which is connected to the size of our prefrontal cortex. So it's physical limits on our social connections, and that means alongside that is the amount of time that we spend with people. So the frequency and the closeness that we have with people, and this plays out in our personal lives and it plays out in our work lives as well. So being kind of cognizant of some of those numbers can be really useful. That means that we can't, you might see a community of practice of 2,000 people. You're not connected with 2,000 people. You're probably connected with maybe 15 up to maybe 40 of those people at the most. So we have to be careful about that size and what happens when communities get too big, and do we want other ways to give people the space to connect. So I've often have people say, oh, we've grown our community really quickly, and it's like, well, that's not really creating the connections that you need to. You might have a graph going up in terms of numbers, but it's probably going to shoot back down again when people aren't really engaged. Organizations often want, so if you're in a matrix management organization, you've probably got a group of people that are let's say product managers, and you may well have a head of product management, and the head of product management will want the product managers to follow certain ways of doing things, or get together around updates or various other things, and there's kind of a formal aspect of that. The thing about communities of practice is they need to be voluntary. So there's two things that you might be. You may be a product manager, which means you're in the formal product management practice or profession, and there's probably things that the organization does to help support you through your job description, through your career pathways, through your opportunities, like the formal stuff. The community of practice, which is people coming together, learning together, sharing knowledge, doing that kind of good stuff, is more of a voluntary activity.
Yeah.
And sometimes you may have both. If you leave everything down to the community of practice, then people end up missing out, because they've opted in or they've not opted in, and suddenly they don't have access to some of the formal stuff like career pathways, other things, or it just becomes mandatory and you're forcing people into a room and not everybody wants to be there, and that takes away from the community, and then people will start dropping off because they don't see that it's for them.
Yeah.
So that becomes problematic. And I think that the other thing that I said was making it more work. So I've also seen this where you have the business needs something. So there's a business need. Maybe it's around something like, I've seen accessibility communities, for example, and you end up with the accessibility community being tasked with doing all the stuff that makes the organization compliant to the rules that it needs to be compliant to. And so you've got a voluntary group of people that have full-time jobs, then being tasked with doing an extra job on top of their jobs, and it just becomes another job. And instead of being a properly funded team or a properly funded working group, or people actually being given time to that, and then they're not spending time learning, sharing, doing all those good things that communities of practice do. They're actually just doing another job on top of their job.
I mean, all three of those are significant issues. The last one particularly, because nobody wants an extra job on top of business as usual. And then you've got the people who are confusing, what work is, which I suppose links to this lack of consensus around the definition of community. Because in some organizations, those who are looking to run with it know what they're after. They know what they want. They know what outcomes they want to achieve. But the senior people who need to sign it off and create space and create conditions for people to meet don't really get it. They think it's a group who are just going to moan and talk about all the things that are wrong in the organization. It's a social thing and so on. So we see a lot of that as well. But if I may come back to the first point you made around scale, because I think that's really important. And Dunbar's number wasn't one I'd come across until one of our early meetings. And it's interesting because now more than ever, I think, you've got lots of organizations with people who've never met each other. You've got teams that have grown 20, 30, some 40% in a remote setting, which doesn't really make it easy to build that sense of, community, getting to know people, that social interaction, that peer-to-peer, all the things that we would take for granted having worked before the pandemic. How do you see communities evolving in this increasingly hybrid world?
So interestingly enough, I run a community which was born out of a meetup that I run. So I've been running it since 2018, so pre-pandemic,
right?
That when people could see each other face to face. So it's a group of people that it's called Agile in the Ether. It's people that get together once a month and just chat about things that are on their mind around kind of people, teams, organizations, that kind of stuff. And it has an associated Slack group with it, which has become a community because the people in it are connected in lots of different ways. And what has been really amazing to see is that is a group of people, some of whom haven't met or only met a couple of times face to face, but they have really strong connections. And so I know that it's possible for people to build connections without actually meeting face to face. But it does takes a bit more consideration. So there are things in that group that are how do we kind of build extra social connections. So things like random coffee, which I think random coffee is brilliant. So this is where two people are randomly paired up with each other and they spend half an hour having a chat about whatever. So
Nice.
Could be what they're up to that day. Sometimes they end up talking about work type stuff because they do, but it connects. I saw it being described a while back as permission to talk to strangers. So it gives you that, like, and we're British, right? Like we don't like talking to people. Sometimes you need a way in. So it's like, here's a person, just ask them how they are and see how their day's going and see where that leads. I've also done that in organizations, and it's just a fantastic way to get to know someone in a in a different space from something like a big Zoom call or a big Teams call, where I always liken that a bit to, you're in a room in a massive circle and only one person's allowed to speak at any time while everyone else stares at them. Like, it's a really, really unnatural.
Yeah.
So doing things like that one-to-one, or there's other things, like we have a channel around called Daily Outside Photo, which was started during the pandemic as a way to get people to go outside for a walk, take a picture, share it on the channel. So we get all these pictures of where people live, and it's just nice. It's just like different ways for people to connect to each other, which means that when we get into the meetup, they've got these connections. There's something really powerful, and I think we were talking about communities of practice, but I think there's value in any communities in the workspace, even if it's people getting together to talk about. One organisation I worked with, they had a flower arranging club, so get together to talk about flower arranging. But what that means is that when they need to work together, because they're not in the same teams, but when they need to work together, they've got those connections already, and it just makes work easier.
Quite. That's really interesting. Random coffee. I hadn't come across the term before either, but it's an interesting concept, because I think naturally we struggle when we meet new people, and more so in a work setting where it feels like what we do socially outside work, over time has started to feel unacceptable inside the workplace. I would say some cultures don't really allow people to express and embrace a lot of that, and it's interesting you've been able to achieve that. And I mean, 2018 feels like 20 years ago, so good going there. I mean, thinking just briefly about what we're doing with Leap and communities. So our driver really is to break down barriers, just to allow people to access other people who can inspire them. And I think that sometimes communities can be so insular that you miss the opportunity to get something different, gain some insight and perspective on how other people are doing the same sorts of things. And I think that's also quite important. So in a hybrid world, you've got the issue of lots of new people in the same organization, but that's actually made even more difficult when you can only talk to or engage with people inside your organization. And linked to that is something that we see a lot of, which is in organizations, people are really nervous about having non-permanent members of staff, in a community, or, having contractors in a community. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
That contractors and suppliers should be a part of communities practice, and there's a couple of reasons. So I'll talk a bit about the 5 benefits of communities of practice that I talk about. So I've talked about supporting people. There's learning and growing capability, bridging knowledge, scaling approaches, and improving practices. So those are the 5 things that I tend to say. I've heard, and I've been in this. It feels like that conversation's been going on for a long time. Like, I was in one organisation back in can't remember now, pre-pandemic, so at least over 5 years ago, where contractors were given 95% utilisation targets. So it's like they can barely leave their desk. They can't go to the loo. That's it. Like, they're not allowed to do anything. And the challenge there, and the what people were saying was, oh, well, they can't go to communities practice because that's training, that's learning. Like, we're not training consultants. And it's like, well, it's not really. There's lots of other stuff in there as well. It is about external people bringing knowledge and learning into the community. And then on the other side as well, it's about, if somebody comes into an organisation and they don't know it, it's really hard for them to navigate that organisation. It's really hard to understand what are the ways that we do things here. What's our quality and standards? How do I do this? How do I book a meeting room? Is always the challenge, right?
Yeah.
How do I access any of this stuff? And if you want people to be taking on and doing things in a similar way, then it's worthwhile bringing them into the community so that they can see how things are done in that organisation. Otherwise, you just continue to get this kind of clash of ways of doing things and clash of people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like going on a holiday to somewhere remote and not having a tour guide. And you're trying to figure out how the organization is set up. Who do I talk to? Who are the stakeholders? What happened before? And so on. I think that's really, really valuable. And it goes both ways, in terms of contractors hopefully informing some of the IP internally within the organization and allowing you to perpetually add to that, rather than having things the other way around where you're the client and you've got so many suppliers and everybody has their own way of doing things. I think that's quite interesting. Couple more questions if I can squeeze them in before we wrap up. So one thought is that we've seen lots of professionals say, I don't have the time. Yes, it's linked to your earlier point. I don't have the time to go to this thing. And it's become apparent that in their minds, the community is what happens when they meet versus what they do in their day jobs. Can you help provide some, clarity on actually what a community should be and the purpose of the meeting itself? Because I think there's some dissonance depending on who you're listening to about what a community of practice is.
Yeah, and I've heard, it's funny because I've heard people say, I'm going to my community of practice, when they mean they're going to their community of practice meeting. And so really the community aspect extends beyond the meeting. The meeting is just a point of getting together where you can do stuff, but that is one way for the community to interact with each other. It is useful to have that heartbeat and making it really regular, like once every week or every other week, but it's about everything else that goes around outside that as well. So it is it's like peer-to-peer mentoring, or it's smaller working groups, or it's I've got a challenge with this particular thing, does anyone know how to solve this problem, and putting that on the instant message tool that the organization uses, and lots of people coming and helping that person out. So it's all of that stuff that goes around it. I think it's worth kind of touching on the time aspect, because I don't know any organization where people say, oh, I've got so much time. I almost feel like it's like goldfish, we go to the size of our tank, like we will always be busy, and if we have time, we'll fill it with more stuff. So it all becomes a question of what you prioritize, and there's reasons that you prioritize stuff. Some of it is intrinsic, some of it is extrinsic, and you will prioritize the community of practice if it's valuable for you and it's helping you at a time that you need help. And sometimes people will spend more time connecting with people in the community if they need extra help around a thing. And then on the other side, if an organization doesn't value the communities and just piles on extra work and says don't do that, it means that people kind of will end up deprioritizing because they have other pressure on them as well. So it's a double-sided thing. The community and the activities the community does needs to be valuable to the people attending it. So members need to kind of own that collectively and improve it and make it work for them. But the organization needs to give people permission and give them some recognition for taking part.
Yeah. Very interesting. I mean, we've covered lots of ground. We've got a masterclass coming up. Final question to you, Emily. What can people look forward to in the masterclass?
So we're going to dig a bit deeper. I'll cover some of the stuff that I covered today, particularly just some tools that help with the case for communities and why they are important. Also some actual tools about how do you get started and what are the things that you might look out in as a community goes through its different maturity phases, and some kind of tips and tricks along the way. So if depending on where people are with their community, there should be something that they can grab and try out and see how that goes. We'll also have some time for people to talk to each other as well. So there'll be an opportunity for people to meet other people and discuss some of their challenges.
Amazing. And of course, there'll be a chance to continue the conversation after the masterclass in a small group. So if that sounds of interest, please do sign up. Go to www. How many W's did I say? 3 W's. .leaphire.io for more information. We've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about leadership buy-in. We've talked about Dunbar's number around the scale and sizing of communities. Talked about why they often start really well and then fade away. And we've also talked about this balance between the need for creating a safe space and being really inclusive with communities, just so that we can get as many perspectives as possible to enrich the value proposition of communities of practice. So if you're looking for a way to get started or to improve an existing community, then the masterclass is certainly right for you. It's on Thursday, the 20th of March. Please look out for more details on social media. Emily, thank you so much for spending time going through this. Looking forward to the masterclass in a couple of weeks.
Thanks.